In this 3D modeling tutorial, I'm going to be taking this high-resolution photogrammetry scan of a building and convert it to this low-poly, typographically pure, game-ready model. And I'll be doing all of this with the power of my mind. And of course, Blender. We will start by loading up our 3D photogrammetry scan of a building into Blender. You can use the techniques outlined within this tutorial to produce similar effects on virtually any object. If you would like to know more about photogrammetry as a topic, then please do watch this video first. Ensure that you have cleaned up your model before you begin. Remove any of the mesh that you don't want included within your final model. Don't worry if this means that the model will have holes in it. We can address those issues later on our optimized low poly model. Now that we have our high-res model in place, let's make a start in converting it over to a low poly model. Right, we're going to begin by adding a simple cube to the scene. I'm going to do this by holding down the shift and clicking A and going to cube under mesh. There it is. Right, using one of the side views, I'm going to hit 3 on my numerical pad. I'm going to position this cube roughly in the same space as my building. That looks pretty fine. I'm going to hit 1 to go to the other side view. I'm going to grab, that's G, and then X, grab on the X, and just try and center that as best as possible. Also, I'm going to scale this cube on the X, so S, X, and then just drag my mouse out a little until that fills pretty neatly. Actually, that's really centered. That's great. I'll do the same with the roof as well, but rather than change the scale, I think just for this one, I'll go into tab into edit mode, just select the face and grab and drop that in. I mean, I could have just scaled it, but I fancied just using something a little different. Maybe I'll drag that down to the bottom of this point here and just bring that up to where that roof starts, maybe about there. And before I go on, because I've been changing the scale of this cube, which by the way is going to be the base for the building, the low poly building, because I've changed the scale of it, I really need to set the actual scaling. At the moment, as you can see here, these measurements aren't great. The dimensions are fine, but these all should be 1s. So I'm going to hit Control A and choose rotation and scale. And there we go. It resets the scale on the X and wherever to 1. I want to edit these points. Can you see if I just go into X-ray mode here and choose the vertex select? Can you see that this falls short? Although on this side it's a bit closer, on this side it's not. So I'm going to grab on the Y and just bring that to that fascia there. And I'll do the same with the bottom here. Grab on the Y. Because if you're working with a building like this, it's very rare you'll actually get a building which is perfectly symmetrical and in line. There are going to be bits which are going to be out, especially with a very old building like this one. So I'm going to drag this until I can see it starting to poke through the original model. So again, just to, in case you're not sure how this is done, I'm selecting a point, then I'm pressing G on my keyboard and I'm using the Y on the keyboard. So it's G, Y, to constrain the movement on the Y axis. And I think I'll do the same with the X, this one over here perhaps. So grab X, and you see there I can constrain it on the X axis, and the same with the top here. Grab X, G, X, and I'll bring that to about there. Maybe push that one a little back. There we are, that's perfect. And grab Y, GY. Same here, GY, Oh, that's good. Right. Same over here. Grab Y. And by the way, if you were to do this, grab X by accident, you can see where you're going with it because you can see the actual line, this pink line appears. Or grab Y, you get this green line appearing, so you know exactly which axes you're working on. So again, I'm dragging that out to there. Same with this one. That's good. Maybe I'll go back to this, push that back out a little. You've got to kind of wiggle these points into position. There, that's pretty good. So in the end, you end up with something which looks like a frosted building. I think there are still a few tweaks to perform. Grab on the X in this particular case. Same here, grab X. Oh yes, that's pretty decent. Okay, we've got the first level done in this building. I'm just going to press the / or on my keyboard ? Key just to hide everything other than the selected object. I'm going to do an edge loop around this so I can push it up and create the top of the roof. And I'll do that by holding down Control key and hitting R. And then when I've got that positioned right, see I can do this, I can move this around to all different areas. If I just do it like this and click, and then right click to deselect that, there we have it. And I'm going to go over here to Edge Select, select the top edge, and coming back to view everything using the / and ? I'm going to grab, that's G, and this time Z, or Z if you're American. I'm going to grab this up until it sits neatly in the roof. Question of just getting it right. But in this case, there's a bit of an added complication here. If I just press 3 on my keyboard just to go to this mode, yeah, we can see that there is a little bit of a fascia here. So if I grab this, I'm not even pressing X or Y in this particular case. Just going to grab it from freehand if you like. If I press the X up here, that will flip to the other side. I think I might go over to Vertex Select and just make sure that that's in the right place. Again, flip back over. Oh, about there. I think that looks about right. So I'm not including the actual roof itself because I think what I'll do is I'll extrude that part. So again, / or ? I'm going to select this face and this face. Going back again, / So I'm going to extrude, that's E, left click, and then G, Z, and bring that up until, again, it's a frosted look. Perfect. So let's have a look at that / You can see the rationale behind me doing that. Great. Great. Now I'm going to go to click on this edge here. There, right. And I'll bring this down so that it sits neatly over there. That's looking reasonable. And I'll do the same over here. Edge select. Grab down to about something like that. That's not perfect, but I think that will just do. That will do. I think also I'm going to select these fascias. Like this. And then extrude, E. And in this particular case, I'm going to Alt S, which will scale it out from its face just a little like that. So now we can see, looking at the building, it's starting to actually look like a real building. Very simple geometry, hardly anything going on there. It's very, very clean. Couple of extra details here need to be added. Can you see just about coming through? We have a window and a door. If I hide my new building, which I think just for now I'm going to rename this low res, and maybe the original building, I'll call that one high res, just so we're nice and organized. But if I just hide the low res for a second or two, you can see that there are a few features here. There's a window there, door there, and another window. There's also a little window dash vent up here as well. So I'm going to need to address all of these things. So going back to low res, I'm in edit mode at the moment by the looks of it, which is great. I'm going to perform another edge loop there and bring that in, and this is going to form the door. And the same here again, just bring that to the edge. And with the windows, same thing again. Edge loop there, edge loop down to about, where do you think? About there. And an edge loop here, and an edge loop there, an edge loop here, and an edge loop there. So again, looking at this model, it's a little more complicated now because there are loads of new edge loops in there. I don't really like this bit here, so I think I'm going to bring that down so it just runs flush. It'll just be good for editing later, should I wish to. What I'll do is I'll select this point here. I'm going to get the measurement, just Control C, copy it, and then select this point here again on the Z, and the same over here on the Z. There we are. That's looking a lot cleaner. Now these were windows, weren't they? So we had, if I go back to face select here, if I just select this face, this one, and this one, these should be extruded inward. Going back to my model, then extrude, E, left click, then grab on the, let's see now, it'd be the Y, and push that out. Now you can see the windows are a little shallower than the door, so I'm going to deselect the windows, or just unselect everything and select the door and grab that. That probably needs to go back a bit further. There we are. Let's have a look at this now. Wow, that's starting to look good. Before we go any further though, I think if I just switch off X-ray mode here, just to make it easier to select stuff, if I just select the floor here, I'm going to press C, then right click, there we go, just to select all of that, then X and delete faces, and we've got that little bit there, that little lip that needs to come out as well. There we go, we've got a very clean model now. We don't need the floor. We really don't need the floor. This building is never going to be on its head. It's never going to be upside down, so that's great. Good. Now that is as far as I think I'm going to take it for the time being. We have a low poly, low resolution building sitting exactly within our high resolution photogrammetry building. And the reason why I've done this is because I'm going to take the textures from the very complicated high resolution building and bake them into the low resolution building. Not only that, I'm also going to take all of the fine detail, and if I just show you what I mean by fine detail, if I just bring this over here, can you see here, you can see all of the blocks and the bumps and what have you. You can see here all of the stonework in the actual mesh itself. It's a very detailed mesh. I'm going to take all that detail and I'm going to bake it into what's called a normal map, which is then going to be applied to the low resolution model. And it's going to create the illusion of high detail, but on a low poly surface. Very easily done. Don't worry if you're thinking this is out of my depth. You'll understand it once we do it. Before we do that though, we're going to need to unwrap this model, which currently doesn't have a texture, that's fine, but we're going to need to unwrap it ready to receive the normal map and the diffuse, the actual photographic information onto it. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select around all of the major edges. Oops, there we go. Maybe I'll do one there. I don't need these ones though, so. Now, whichever method you use, I can go into a tutorial on that, but I won't because it's going to take too long. But whichever method you use for selecting these, if you just select all of the edges, and by doing so, once you've actually selected your edges, I think I'll leave it there for the time being. I am going to come back and do all of the edges. You need to right-click and mark seam. And this is going to help the whole process of unwrapping this object so that when you have that texture file, that file which contains the photographic information and the normal map information, it's going to appear almost like, you know, when you're a bit younger, you had one of those little cutout models of a building and it had loads of tabs on it and you could sort of fold it. It's going to look a bit like one of those. So it's going to be all of that information on the surfaces of this model flat in one image file. I'll show you what that looks like later. So I'll just carry on selecting these and I'll be back in a very short while. Good, I think I've selected all of the major edges. I'm not bothering with any bits in between. So you can see that I've selected around the inside of the windows, insides of the doors. Don't forget the corners as well. The corners are very important. So each individual selected area is going to become a zone, if you like, on the unwrapped texture. So if I right click now and choose mark seam, we should end up with something a little like that. Don't bother with the edges at the bottom because that's just an open void. Oops, there's one there I've selected erroneously. So I'm going to select that, right click and clear seam. Perfect. I think that is everything. We will soon find out, because I'm going to expand this screen over here. If you've got an area which is already divided, then that's fine. But if not, I'm going to take my cursor over here until it forms a crosshair, click and drag, and I'm going to choose UV editor. Now back in this screen here, I think I might, just for simplicity's sake, go over to face select, select all, which is just A, the A key, and then UV mapping, and I'm going to choose Unwrap. And there we have it. There is our unwrapped model. Now, I always like to add a little bit of margin to this. 0.1 just pushes them slightly further apart. Maybe that's a little overkill. How about 0.05 in this particular case? That looks good. Now, if you're a real Puritan and you want to get more detail into this model, perhaps you could look for ways of optimizing how these are spaced so that you can actually increase all of these objects, thereby increasing the amount of definition in your texture. So what I could do is I could come over here to the UV select mode, which is the islands, which is the last option here, which allows me to select whole groups. And I could do something perhaps a little like this. I think I'll fast forward all of this for your sake. Okay, I could spend all day trying to get the best out of this, but I think that will do. There are a number of add-ons out there which can do a better job than the default way of dividing up the faces into islands, but I think that will do. So what I can do here, this is kind of cheating, but I can see here that there is a bit of a bias toward the y-axis here. It's almost fitting perfectly within that. If I just SY, just make it, there we go, so it's sitting as close as it can to the edge without going over the edge, and SX, I can expand it like that. I want to get the most out of this, cover as much of the texture, which this is going to be, this grid, as possible. One thing I need to make sure is that there's no overlaps, it doesn't go over the edge, no object is doing anything like this. You don't want them overlapping with other objects. If you can find a better way of cramming these together, then the better. So now that everything's unwrapped, if I just reduce this down again, I think I might change this to the shader editor. And I'm going to press N to get rid of this here. We don't actually have a texture assigned to this, or you may have a texture, but if you don't, come out of edit mode. If you're in edit mode, make sure your object is selected, your low res object, go down to the material properties and click on new. And I might call this just, how about building? And there's my texture. And by the way, if you can never see your texture, if it's just a little off, if it's just hidden, then you can always take your cursor over to the area where it should be and press full stop, and that will pop it into the window here. Good. Now we need to do two things here. We need to create two textures, because this is going to have a diffuse, which is the photographic side of the texture applied to it. It's also going to have a normal map. So if I come over here and press Shift A, S, and then type in image, there you go, hit enter to create an image texture, and I'm going to duplicate that, Shift D, and I'll put that down there. And in this one, if I just hit new, I'm going to type in diffuse. You could type in whatever you want into the width and height here. I'd recommend keeping them equal. This would be a 1K. If you want to go for 2K, then go for your 2048. If you want to go for a 4K, then of course you go for 4096, or is it 98? 96. Anyway, okay, now my maths is not great. Here's a tip for you. If you want to increase that number by a certain amount, and this works on so many apps, it's not just Blender. If I actually do a bit of maths next to the number, times, or asterisk, 2, and then I come away from that, it types in that number. There you go, you may not have known that. So there we go, I'm going to go for a 2K texture, which is a sort of medium quality texturing for this model. 2048 for the width, 2048 for the height. I'm going to leave all of those as they are, and I'll click on OK. So that's my diffuse sorted. It says 001 there because I was experimenting with this earlier. I wanted to make sure this works before I go through a tutorial on the topic. Okay, new. In this case, this one's going to be the normal map. And again, it's make sure that your width and your height are the same. Try and keep them all consistent if possible. Click on OK. And I normally turn the color space down to a non-color. Good. Right, now this is where you're going to need a pen and paper, I think, just to make a note of all of these settings, because this gets a little complicated, but once you get into the routine, you should be absolutely fine. I'm just going to come out of / there so I can see both models. I'm going to select the high res first, and then holding down the control key, I'm going to select the low res. And I'm going to make sure that diffuse is selected over here because we're going to bake the diffuse first. So high res, control, low res, and then we need to come over to the render properties. Make sure that cycles is on, GPU compute if you've got it. I usually bring down my render to about, on the maximum samples, down to about 8. Coming down, max bounces, I normally put all of these onto 2. Switch off caustics, reflective and refractive. And then make sure that your tile size is the same size as your image. And then we need to go to bake. Now I'm selecting diffuse because that is the texture that we're doing at the moment. We're going to be baking the photographic diffuse information onto our low-res model. Switch off direct and indirect. Selected to active must be checked, and make sure that you've got an extrusion of 0.1. Now that we've done that, don't forget to save your model. You don't want to lose all of that hard work. So I've just pressed Ctrl S, or you can go up to File and Save. I'm sure you know how to do that. Once we've done that, we just need to click on Bake. Now this may take a minute or two depending on the speed of your computer. You see down here, here is the progress bar. You'll find that it doesn't move at small increments. It kind of jumps from like 0 to 12%, then 25%, then 50%, so on and so forth. So do be patient with it, and I'll be back shortly. Good. Now, you're thinking to yourself, what on earth's happened? Tell you what we'll do. Let's just split this window up here. I'm going to change this to Image Editor, and there you go. Now, if you can't see it, if you can't see what I'm seeing here, you may need to click on this and choose Diffuse from the drop-down. But there we have it, all unwrapped. Something strange has happened with the back wall here. For some reason, it has a bit of an unnatural slope. I don't know why that is. There must be something in the geometry that's kind of messed up somewhere, but that's okay. Let's just leave it as it is. So now that we've got this in place, it's now time to go over to our normal. So selecting normal, let's just tidy that up a little bit. I'm going to go back to Bake and choose from the Bake type normal. All of the settings are in place from last time. Control S to save and click on Bake. Good, there's our normal map. Now, I have to confess here, my mistake, I forgot to actually save these texture files. You'll notice that when you come to the window here, there's this little asterisk next to the word image, and that's prompting you to click on it and then save. So I've got my texture folder here. I've created this in the same place that I've saved my original Blender document. So if I just come in here, yep, normal, that's good. I'm going to save it as normal. There's my little experiment from earlier. I think I'll write over that. That's great. So that's now saved. And very importantly, I need to go back to Diffuse. And you see you've got the asterisk there again. So save or save as, whichever you prefer. And I'll make sure that that is now saved. So we've got those as files. We have our normal and our diffuse all saved, all safe. Believe it or not, this is the point now where we can actually get rid of our high-res model. I'm not going to do that, just in case I want to practice or do something else to this model later. But just for the time being, I think I'll hide that. I'll go over to the visibility bit and I will just click on those two just to disable the visual viewport rendering of the image and also the ability to render. So now all I can see is my building. Nothing seems to be in place. What has happened? So there's a couple of things that have happened here. Firstly, I'm in the wrong mode. I need to come over to viewport shading, but it's still white. There's nothing happening. But if I connect color here on my diffuse to base color, kaboom! Look at that. Isn't that amazing? And you doubted me. How dare you? Right, so that's looking pretty good. It's very two-dimensional though, isn't it? It's very flat and unrealistic. There's no bump or what have you there. So coming down to normal, I'm going to drag from here over to here, and something very strange happens. It just kind of goes a little bit shiny and rather mirror-y and dark and what have you. That's because we need to add in, if I just press Shift A and S and type in normal, we need to add this little node here, the normal map node. If I just drag that in between, and then making sure, of course, you've got color space on non-color. If you were to have this, by the way, on sRGB, which is the default, you'll find that it will look a little bit weird in places. I don't know if I could simulate it or not, but anyway, it needs to be on non-color. And now look at that. We can see there's a little bit of detail coming through. Can you see that? Maybe if I disconnect the base color. There we go. Look at that. There is detail now baked in to the model. Remember, we're only dealing with a model which is like this. And yet you have all this brick detail coming through. Maybe if I exaggerate the strength so you can really see it, just for the viewers at home, that is. That's all baked in. I'll put that back to 1 and I'll reconnect my color. Perfect. Now, I did say at the very beginning of this tutorial there are going to be gaps, in the model, because this model wasn't perfect. I don't have a drone, so when I scanned this model in, I had to do it from about this height here. So I couldn't actually get much of the roof in, and as a result, there are holes in the model. Well, of course, this model doesn't have any holes in it. It's only in the texturing. So there are a variety of ways I can solve this problem. I could, for instance, if I just press 7 on my keypad, just to go to a sort of a top-down view. If I went over to texture paint, I've got to do that again, haven't I? 7, there we go. Forgot about that. Move that over a little bit. I could use the stamp tool or the clone tool. Sorry, I use Photoshop, I'm getting confused. And holding down the control key, making sure that I've got diffuse selected up here. That's the texture we're working on out of the two. The file we're working on, I should say. I can just clone that information over like that. And I think I'll do the same here as well. This is very wonky. So using control key to target a good area and then going to apply it to the wonky area or the part that's missing. Now you may be a little confused that there are certain areas that don't seem to respond to the clone. Well, you're not going crazy. What that is the normal map is coming through and messing things up. So if I choose normal and do the same thing again, that should remove those rather strange effects that are coming through. Cloning really is a bit of an art. If you prefer, you can do this within Photoshop. You can just load up the diffuse and the normal file and edit it from within there. But I think because this roof is so simple to begin with, I can get away with a quick edit in Blender itself. It's not perfect. It's much easier to do this in Photoshop. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to keep it simple. Good, that is far from perfect, but I don't think it's too bad. I could go around the rest of the model now, just looking for any areas where it looks a little dodgy and just clone those out. Again, going between diffuse and normal. I mean, if the information's not there and it's damaged, then you may as well just have a go with the clone tool just to clean it up a little. Good, I think that will do. There is a little bit of extra detail in there. I think I'll leave that. It's so flat to begin with. I think the normal map covers it. Now, I didn't do anything with this, but the beauty of working with a clean mesh is that I can go in there and start making changes to it without having to worry about 1001 polygons that are all over the place in different shapes at different angles. I can just do things like this. I press K for the knife tool. This is going to add a little bit of extra geometry doing this. Oh no, it hasn't in this case. There we go. I'm going to select those two faces. I'm going to do an extrude. I think I'll just keep it simple. Grab on the X. There we go. Nice recess there. Okay, texturing's not great along there. If I wanted to, perhaps I could select that new geometry, unwrap it. Go to my UV editor, and that's obviously the window there. I'll shrink that down, drop it in there or something, so we've got at least something. It's not perfect, but it's better than naught. There we are. There is our model. There's more that I'm going to do with this. Because yes, the normal map's baked in, the diffuse is all there, that's great. But there's a couple of other things. For instance, I always like to add a little bit of bump to my models. I also like to add smoothness. Great, so I'm going to add a bump and a smooth, but before I do that, I'm going to make sure I'm going to click on Save All Images, and that will save both the diffuse and the normal in this case, all of the changes I've just made from within Texture Paint. That will now be saved into the actual files themselves, which is this one and this one. There's a few issues with some of the normals, but hey-ho. I think I'll leave that for the time being. Whenever you see these wild colours like green and orange and red, then that means that it's not quite doing what it should be doing, but the rest of it, the bulk of it, looks good. I'm going to duplicate my test diffuse twice, and I'm going to rename one of them smooth, and the other I'm going to rename bump. And I'll bring those two into Photoshop, and within Photoshop, or whichever editor you're using, in Photoshop, if I press Ctrl U, that brings up the hue and saturation, and I can take the saturation levels down like that. I don't know what it is in other programs, but that's what it is in Photoshop. And I'll do the same with this one, taking all of the color information out, so we just got two black and white images. Now with smooth, I usually invert Ctrl I, and then call up my levels, Ctrl L, and I like to make it a lighter, sort of washed out grey. Now when dealing with a smooth texture file, the dark areas will become the glossy and the light areas will become the dull. So you can see here there's a little bit of gloss on the roof and a little bit of dull in other places. You could further refine this in Photoshop by darkening certain areas that you want to become more glossy, lightening areas that you want less glossy, but I think that will do for now. With the bump, I don't invert, but I like to call up my levels and perhaps lighten this all a little. It's a bit dark. I also like to filter and blur, just to take away any of the harshness of the text you see there before and thereafter. It just softens it a little bit. Don't overdo it. Now if I save these two, Control S in Photoshop, and go back to my model, and if I just move these around a little, I'm going to call in a new node. That's with Shift A, S, and then if I type in bump, there it is. I'm going to place that in between the normal and the principal BSDF, and I'm going to duplicate this, Shift D, and take the color and plug that into the height and change this file to my bump, making sure that non-color is selected, and we should see, ooh, look at that, that's a very different animal to what it was earlier. I'm going to reduce the strength down now. I would suggest 0.2 or something like that, or at least adjust it until it's bearable. And that has added a little more on. If I put that down to 0, you can see it's a bit mushy. 0.2 or 0.25 maybe just adds a little more grit, a little more detail. And finally, smooth. Duplicate one of these images. Color to roughness. Obviously, roughness, smoothness, same kind of thing. Two ends of the same bar. I'm going to select smooth and then change to non-color. We can see now there's a little bit of reflectiveness on the roof, but not so much on the walls. Now that is looking amazing. Bear in mind, this has hardly any geometry. In fact, if I come here and call up my statistics, this model has 137 faces. Compare that to this model here, which has just under a million faces. So from 1 million, let's say, it's rounded off to 137 faces. Now that's what I call optimization. And I think you'll agree that is quite a nice model. And I can edit it, I can add extensions onto it, I can put new windows, new doors in. It's going to be so easy to edit now. And it's just a tiny, tiny file. Perfect for games, perfect for low poly rendering. There we go, done. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Like it, share it, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.